Bonjour everyone, I am Anne Lise Cailliez and welcome to Parlez-vous CEO, where we ditch the corporate talk and get real about entrepreneurship. Each week, I chat with founders and CEOs who build businesses their way, through the failures, pivots, and breakthroughs. And they bring the fire. Plus, I'll drop some golden nuggets of wisdom from my own entrepreneurial journey. This is your space to grow, learn, and evolve with a true growth mindset. Remember, success isn't about perfection, it's about persistence. Now let's kick things off and get this party started. Hello, bonjour, bonjour, hello. Welcome to another episode of Parlez-vous CEO. My name is Anne Lise Cailliez and I am your host. For those who are just joining the podcast with Anne Lise Marketing, we specialize in helping female-led businesses scale their revenue. If you want to learn how to take your business to the next level, make sure to stick around every week. And if you're interested in a free growth consultation, just drop the word growth in the DMs. So today we have a very special guest and I'm really pumped to have this conversation with Erin Lee, who's based in London, but who's originally from America. So I'm super excited to dive in and hear your story and what you're building right now. Erin, in your own words, could you describe a little bit about your background, who you are, and what you're building right now?
Yeah. So I would say my background is a little bit non-traditional for the medtech space. I've spent the last 20 some odd years largely in high growth consumer tech. So I started my career at Google, played a number of roles there from product marketing to analytics. I actually traveled overseas about 10 years ago with Uber. So I worked in our operations for Northern Europe and the Middle East. So hyperscale, very fast growth company. My first foray into healthcare was with a company called Babylon Health, which was sort of a digital primary care, value-based care company in sort of the UK, but then global. And after about 4.5 years, I was really looking for my next challenge. And that brought me to Flow Neuroscience, which is a wearable device that treats depression with non-invasive stimulation.
Wow, that's super impressive. That's awesome. Would you share a bit more about Flow and specifically the product that you guys have built?
Yes. So Flow's been around for about 10 years. We've been commercial for about 5. We have, as I mentioned, a platform that treats depression without drugs. And the primary part of that platform is a wearable treatment. So we use non-invasive stimulation or a mild form of electricity to target the area of the brain responsible for mood, memory, focus. And by stimulating that area of the brain, we increase activity and reduce depressive symptoms. So it's very futuristic, but it actually works.
That's really awesome. And so what made you're coming from bigger companies like Uber, Google. What made you want to join after Babylon Flow? What was in it for you? What was exciting?
So I think it might be a little bit of a mental illness, but I love to build. So I'm really drawn, if you look at my career, when I choose to move on, as once a company is sort of established, they've gone through that scale, and it's really about stabilization. That's less interesting to me. I absolutely respect that phase of business, but it's not for me. I really like the adrenaline and the challenge of building something from scratch. I would say at Babylon, as I mentioned, that was my first foray into healthcare. But once you're in the healthcare space, it's very difficult to justify leaving just because of the immense impact that you can have on people's lives, on their well-being. And in particular, because we were doing primary care at Babylon, what you saw a lot was the importance of mental health care as a major component into overall well-being. And what you also see is how limited the treatment options were. So when I met Daniel and Eric over at Flow, and the opportunity to sort of build this new treatment from scratch I couldn't say no. It was too appealing.
That's awesome. So the founders are Swedish.
They are.
And we were discussing before, and you were telling me you were coming from Uber with the background with Dutch people. So how has that been, and how is that, you think, affecting the way business is conducted?
Yes. Obviously, I think Americans have a certain reputation of being very effusive and very, loud to say the least. But I've spent now 10 years in Europe, so I thought I'd sort of acclimated at least to sort of the British way of working. Babylon was obviously a British company. I spent as I mentioned to you at Uber a number of years with the Dutch, who are very blunt, very matter of fact. So that takes some getting used to. And I would say Daniel and Eric, what sort of caught me off guard, at least initially, was they're super to the point. Like what you see is what you get. There's no selling of anything, right? In a way, they sort of undersell what they have. It can be a very tough audience. Sometimes you don't know how they're reacting because they're very stone faced, but they're also very logical. So I would say, in a world coming from the startup space where people sort of overpromise and underdeliver, my experience has been sort of the reverse, which is really underpromising and over-delivering. I don't know if that's a product of being Swedish or Daniel and Eric in particular, but
Wow, that's awesome. I love that. I mean, I love directness. And to me,
yeah.
being a foreigner, transparency, that direct style of communication, I find a lot easier to understand. So comparing to scaling business like Uber or Google and a different style of management that maybe Danielle and Eric have, being Swedish, what have you felt have been the difference in maybe hiring, certain people, company culture, or the growth of the company?
Yes, that's a good one. So I'll say I think there's some elements that are more a product of time and the environment. And then I think there's some that are culture. So I would say, when we were growing Uber and even Babylon, that was very much sort of this zero interest rate, growth at any cost, spend as much money, profitability is really secondary, go, go, go. And there's a ton of adrenaline that comes with that. I think there are unique challenges, right? Because everyone is going a million miles an hour. When I joined Flow about 3.5 years ago now, it was right after COVID, and actually the bottom had really fallen out of the market. And so what I would say is that even though Flow had been around during that sort of growth at any cost, they had really built a responsible business. So you could see that they were in it for the long haul. They were still a very small team. I think there was maybe 12 when I joined. Line of sight into profitability, which is unheard of for a company of that size. So very responsible in a way that you don't often see with startups. They didn't take for granted that there would be money right around the corner. I would say the Swedish working culture has taken some getting used to. I would say that also broadly about the European way of life. I think when I first joined, I couldn't believe the out of offices that I was getting. I was like, what do you mean people are gone for a month? This is crazy. I don't think I've taken that much vacation in my life. But I can now see the pros, right? I am a workaholic. I don't know if just because I'm an American, but look, I think there is some performative workaholism in the US culture that we can definitely learn from the Europeans with their vacations. I don't think you'll ever see me take a 2-month vacation, but that sort of that balance has taken some getting used to. I think I'm used to much more ruthless environments where people are working 20-hour days, 365 days a year.
I am laughing because I am French, so I understand the discrepancy between the two countries. And so how many users do you have right now? I saw 35,000. I don't know how accurate.
We actually have 50,000 now. So 50,000 users. We work with about 500 clinics across Europe. And then we have pilots with multiple NHS trusts.
And in your experience in the past 3-4 years, what have you seen being the biggest barrier to adoption you didn't anticipate?
That's a good question. I would say the biggest barriers have been things that I actually didn't anticipate. So I assumed that we were going to have a harder time convincing clinicians that they needed an alternative to drugs or about the limitations of SSRIs. We actually didn't have to convince them at all. They really found us. I would say the first hurdle, and this was right after I joined, is we didn't have the double-blinded placebo-controlled trial. So there was some general literature. We had our real-world evidence from about 20,000 users at the time, but we had no clinical evidence. And so I think the clinicians were pretty reasonable. They're like, sounds great, come back when you have evidence. And so then once we had the results from that trial, we got our first pilots with the NHS. And then actually it was other trusts looked at those first trusts. And so it was sort of word of mouth spread. And then once we had some press around the NHS adoption, then that's such a trusted brand. Then we actually saw consumer and clinician adoption follow. On the flip side, we are sort of an unusual medical device company in that in many ways we look like a consumer device. You'll see our advertisements on Facebook and Instagram, but we're also, highly regulated class 2A, and there's some tension there. And so one of the things I didn't expect was how difficult the regulatory environment would be. in that they don't really know what to do with us. And because we're first, I think there's a first mover disadvantage in many cases.
I was going to ask about that, about regulations. You've been in the European market for a while. What's your penetration with the US market, and what are going to be the challenges similarly with different regulations again?
Yeah, so we've been solely focused on the European market to date. So the UK is our largest market. Germany is a close second, and then sort of a smatter, I think, France, then Iberia. The US, we have been pursuing FDA approval. We've had some hiccups there with the new administration. There's been some turnover. So that's taken much longer than we've anticipated. We have a lot of interest in the US off the back of what we've done with the NHS. And we have quite a waiting list, but it is sort of contingent on the FDA approval. So we hope to have that in the next few months. Who knows?
And I am a marketer, and I am curious as to how working with a heavily regulated market, how does that impact all your strategy and also speed to innovation? How is it to work in a heavily regulated industry like that?
So I've had some experience in heavy regulation. I think people don't realize how regulated the taxi industry is, for example. But really, I think Babylon was the first exposure to that. It is, I'll say, even when you can appreciate why regulation exists, it is excruciatingly frustrating, especially for a small business. I think regulators make, perhaps rightly so, no differentiation between a Pfizer, a multi-billion-dollar company and a small startup. I think you can understand perhaps why many startups avoid going the regulated route. We've spent millions of dollars on regulation. It's an incredible time investment, and it's actually a disadvantage. Like, it limits the way that we can advertise. It limits the way that we can market. We've done it because we believe in the science, and we think really in order to be legitimate, you've got to follow that path, right? You've got to be regulated. You've got to get buy-in from clinicians. But had we not done that, we probably would have grown a lot faster because the restrictions would have been a lot less.
And what have you found the most efficient, not expensive, most efficient to grow your audience, your customer base?
So in a way, we started marketing, and this is sort of where my lack of experience or our sort of naivete sort of played in our favor. We didn't really know what the playbook was for marketing a medical device. So a lot of people are like, why did you go D2C? That's unheard of. Well, one, because we could, but two, it's what we knew. And so I think our driving initial awareness via some of the social channels was very powerful for us. And then I would say it was sort of a couple of things. We had some testimonials from some very niche but influential users. And those testimonials went a long way, particularly because they were very authentic. And then being able to, I think, leverage some of the coverage around the NHS, that trust signal. And then fundamentally, it's our Trustpilot reviews. I think people seeing the experience of others, and they don't really have to take our word for it, right? They can go and they see that, we've got nearly 5 stars. I know it seems too good to be true, but it isn't. If it doesn't work for you, we'll give you your money back. So I think it's really an amalgamation of things, but primarily leaning into those D2C channels to start.
And who is your, I guess it's not client or customer, maybe patient, or who is your ideal customer? Who are you really reaching out to, and who do you think could benefit the most from your device?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges and one of the opportunities is that Flow works for so many people. I would say our early adopters, and I would still say a large percentage of our users, are folks who have maybe had depression for a while, many years, have tried everything. They've tried multiple different antidepressants, they've tried behavioral therapy, they might have tried inpatient. Nothing has worked for them. So they sort of come to us as a last resort, nothing to lose. There's another subset of users who have horrific side effects from the drugs, whether or not they work for them, right? Maybe they have some benefit, but they have sexual side effects, weight gain, worsening of symptoms. So they're looking explicitly for a drug-free alternative. And then there's this third subset who are already on a lot of drugs, could be elderly, could be comorbid. They don't want to be on anymore. So they come and find us. But we really have a diverse user group. Like, we have new mothers, nursing mothers, again. So it really depends.
And tell us a bit more about your device. So how soon, in general, have users been seeing results?
Yeah, so the protocol is generally for the first 3 weeks, we call it the activation phase, and we suggest that you do 5 sessions for 30 minutes. So each session is 30 minutes. And about 80% of our users will see clinically significant results in the first 2 weeks. And that usually, drives people to stick with it. So it's usually within those first 2 weeks. And then our remission rates over time, so 12 weeks, remission being people who don't have any depressive symptoms at the end of 12 weeks, is about 50% for people who are not on antidepressants. And then people who have taken antidepressants is closer to 70%. So most folks will see some benefit, full reduction in depressive symptoms, anywhere from 50 to 70%.
Wow, that's really impressive. And how about anxiety, or is it mainly targeting depression?
So we mainly target sort of depression focus. We actually also see real benefits from sleep. Some people, anxiety is a really interesting one. So for some people, they will see a benefit, but we target sort of the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And what we're trying to do is drive additional activity in that region. And there are some studies on anxiety, again, there's different types of anxiety, that show that actually what you want to do to address anxiety is reduce activity in this region and increase activity on the
Mhm.
right side. And so for our second device, which is coming out later this fall, we'll be able to do that. So for now, we don't target anxiety.
And Erin, do you feel there are some misconception that people have about your industry?
Absolutely. I would say, I think if you look at sort of the device space, you have, I think you have a lot of unregulated devices. So you have some cowboys. And so I think you see people out in the space, who I'll sort of remain nameless, that are making all kinds of claims, right? They claim to treat everything under the sun. That doesn't really benefit, I think, the medical device space. I think increasingly, as people are looking for alternatives to drugs, you see more entrants in the space, and not all of them are good actors, right? And so I think there's a lot of skepticism, rightly so. I think people are used to being promised, the sun, the moon, and the stars, not just from medical devices, but even cosmetic devices. So you can think about, LED masks, etc. So skepticism level is high. I would say the belief that it couldn't work or drugs are the only way, I think is a misconception that I had to get over myself. As an American, we sort of better living through chemistry, better living through pharma. But there are very real limitations to that approach. So I would say, in general, people think it can't work, drugs are the only way, or that it's basically snake oil. And I would
Mhm.
encourage them to look at sort of the science, and look who does have those trials and who doesn't.
And Erin, as a CEO of a big company and scaling so many businesses, I'm curious to know, who are the people that you look up to? Are there any celebrity influencers, other CEO? Who do you get inspired by? Who get your juices flowing?
Wow. That's a good one. I would say, I think for a lot of my career, I've probably looked to people that maybe are less known, although I say that, then I'm going to tell you who they are. And you're gonna be like, of course we know who they are. So I would say, sort of quote unquote, growing up at Google, I was incredibly fortunate to be surrounded, and I don't think I appreciated it at the time, but to be surrounded by some really incredibly smart and humble women. And I would name Claire Johnson, who went on to be the COO of Stripe, who I worked with for many years. I was just so taken is the wrong word, but I was just so impressed by her. She was so down to earth. She was so human. She really cared about the team and the business. You really felt seen. Worked with Layla Sturdy on the Google Offers product. Again, really smart, had scaled YouTube. They just have this unique experience. And of course, for many years, Sheryl Sandberg was leading sort of the AdWords business. She probably doesn't need an introduction. And so I think, in a way, just passively having that exposure, you sort of take for granted that that's the bar.
Mhm.
I mean, of course, I look at the space and who's out there, less about celebrities, because I think you get such an unbalanced picture. But those are maybe some of the women that I would point to that have been instrumental to me.
Great picks.
Yeah.
And Erin, you mentioned that you love business adrenaline earlier.
Yes, yes.
How does that convey in your personal life? Are you doing any extreme sports?
No, I actually do the reverse. I think
Oh, really?
so. My job, I'm not saying I would encourage this, but it's what's worked for me, has dominated my life for the last 20 years and I've loved it. Like I wouldn't change a thing. I've been all over the world. I've worked with incredible people. I've done extraordinary things with those teams. But it really has been 24/7, 365. And people also say, working at a startup every year is like a dog year. So it's like you've lived 7 years. And so when I'm in my quote unquote downtime, which isn't all that often, I'm actually very boring. So I really like gardening. I'm not super exciting, but I'll do some reading. But fundamentally, like work is my adrenaline. So yeah.
I see. So a lot of business adrenaline, and outside of that, very chill.
Yeah, I try. I think it'd be overstimulating. So I try to be risk averse in the rest of my life and then like
Hmm.
full on into risk in the corporate world.
And have you ever thought about starting your own business?
I have a couple of times. I think I've never felt like what I wanted to do was compelling enough as a standalone business. I think I've always been fortunate enough to have found positions and careers in incredible businesses, right? Where you sort of get to be an entrepreneur. And I think Flow has been the closest I've ever felt to being a founder. I have some ideas. So you may see Erin start her own thing. But for now, we're very focused on Flow.
And Erin, what advice would you give to someone who is just starting out in your field?
I used to get this advice and I thought it was so annoying. But now with the benefit of time, like I can appreciate it. So I am gonna share it. And if I was giving my 21-year-old self, it'd be like, don't overthink it. And I was so ruthlessly ambitious when I was young. Like I wanted to make it so bad. I tried to be so calculating about what role I was going to take and where was it going to get me. And like, was I going to get that next promotion? And then what? And then what? And then what? And this isn't me saying don't be ambitious. It's saying don't give yourself some space to make some mistakes, right? And so I think, just starting out, the best thing you can do is also figure out what you don't want to do. Like, don't sit out and think like, I got to find my dream job that's going to make me super successful because there's so many things that are outside of your control, which I can appreciate now. And in many ways, I am where I am in large part because of luck and timing and all sorts of things. Spend time figuring out what you like to do, what you don't like to do. Surround yourself with really intelligent people, right? I try to be the dumbest person in any room that I'm in. I think that's a good indicator that I'm in the right rooms. Maybe not for the other folks, but for me. So surround yourself by great people. Find something that you love doing. By default, you'll probably be pretty good at it if you like doing it. And then give yourself some space. Don't be too hard on yourself if you're not getting that promotion, 2 years out of school. Just enjoy life a little bit because it comes at you fast. So
That's a great piece of
yeah.
advice. And have you felt that you've been too hard with yourself when you were younger, maybe, and that has reduced over with time?
I took myself so seriously when I was younger. Like I probably should send some apology letters and some gift baskets to my early managers. I've been very fortunate to have some very forgiving managers. I never felt like I was doing well enough, particularly in these hyper competitive environments. I never was excelling fast enough. I was super hung up on what my title was or, were my slides the best. And looking back, like, it was so stupid. What was more important is, and again, you won't appreciate it until later. It's like, yeah, you were doing slides, but it was what you were learning about the offers world and what worked and what didn't, and the people that you were doing it with. And then years later, you cross paths again, and it almost feels like serendipity or fate. Like, oh, the reason I did that was so that 10 years later, we would cross paths in a different way. So I would try to listen more to what my father said, which is stop comparing, like what is it like? Comparison is a thief of joy. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's true. I should have appreciated more the opportunity to surround myself with exceptional individuals rather than feeling like I was never doing good enough.
And where do you think your drive is coming from? Why do you think you put so much emphasis on your career and your work? Why does it matter so
I
much to
have
you?
no idea, because my parents asked me the same thing because they're very mellow, growing up. They were very much like, just do something that you love. Like I grew up in a very, like they were, they were tough on us. They always wanted us to excel or do the best that they knew we were capable of, but they certainly weren't these intense, like you're going to be a surgeon. They were very, supportive And I've always been, I guess, a nightmare. I've always just been obsessed with initially succeeding. And now I think that's changed. Like for me, if you'd asked 20-year-old Erin what was success, I would have said, I want to be on the cover of Forbes. I'm going to be 40 under 40. Like everyone's going to know who I am. And now I would prefer nobody knows who I am. But have I done something that mattered? Like I've got one life. Do I wake up every day and am I doing something that has the most benefit for the most people? And it sounds very woo-woo, but you start to realize that that's really what matters. Like, can I make a difference? Can I inspire someone else to make a difference in a meaningful way? Like, do I do the hard work? So
When do you think was that shift of awareness for you? Or if maybe it was not like a shift, like how did you gradually get there to understanding that about you?
I think it was gradual over time, but maybe it was towards the end of Babylon, seeing that business from start to IPO. For all intents and purposes, on paper, I'd sort of made it. And I think you hear this a lot, where you look at like everyone says, like, what a great resume you have. Like you've worked with all these extraordinary companies, you've made it. And you're still just like, okay, but if I reflect back on my life, like how much of what I did really ultimately mattered, right? I spent so many years making slides that no one ever looked at, right? I learned a lot, but maybe they weren't the most impactful things. And I think at Babylon, in the healthcare space, you really felt like we were making a meaningful difference. And you heard from folks who had access to healthcare they'd never had. It was life-changing. And at that point, I was like, I have enough. I'm certainly not Bill Gates over here. I'm certainly not Elon Musk, but for me, it was enough. And I wanted to focus more on driving a meaningful difference in a place that's quite hard to do, right? In a highly regulated space dominated by pharma. And I sort of want to prove that it's possible because a lot of people think it isn't. So I think that was the shift.
I love that. I love hearing that. I mean, the importance of finding something purposeful and meaningful in a career, it's not always an easy exercise to be able
No.
to combine career and sense of purpose. So it's nice to hear that and it's refreshing. And Erin, so where is the business going and what are you excited about for the next upcoming years?
Gosh, I would say this is probably the hardest thing I've ever done, but the most rewarding. And I think every day I get up and I'm fortunate enough to read some of our patient reviews, right? We get them through Trustpilot or the App Store, and that really keeps us going. And so I do think, what's the saying? Like first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, and then they sort of take you seriously. I think we're getting to like past they laugh, and now people are starting to take us seriously. And interestingly, it's like also seeing new sort of competitors enter the space. There's something here. It feels like we're at a real inflection point, and I'm so excited about the ability to make this sticky, like to prove people wrong. Like no one thought this was possible. And there's so much need, mental health is so poorly treated around the world. And this is such a real solution. I'm so excited about that. And quite frankly, like once we get over these regulatory hurdles, I'm really excited to build and grow, right? Again, like I want to get back to the business and to put the device in the hands of as many people as possible. That's what excites me. So I hope that at the end of, not even the end of next year, but I hope by next year, you'll see us in the US, you'll see us in the Middle East, you'll see us in Australia. Who knows? The sky's the limit.
That's awesome. I love what you're doing. I love what you're building. I love your ethos. And I'm definitely looking forward to having you guys come to the US.
Yes. Probably not as much as we would like to be there. But yeah, we're really looking forward to it.
And Erin, how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about what you do?
Yeah, so you can visit our website, flowneuroscience.com, or you can email me directly if you have questions, comments, Erin at flowneuroscience.com. That is my real email address. I do get all those emails. I will respond. Sometimes I get more than I expect, but reach out. I'm always happy to have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin, for coming to the show today. It was such a pleasure learning about what you do and your story.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
And that wraps up today's episode. I am Anne Lise Cailliez, and I can't wait to join you again next week. Thanks for listening to Parlez-vous CEO today. If you enjoyed the show, leave a 5-star review. It helps us keep going. And connect with us on Instagram at Parlez-vous CEO. I am Anne Lise Cailliez, and I know some days are harder than others. On those tough days, think back to why you started. What you're doing today matters, even when you can't see the results yet. Ideas are great, but it's what you do with them that counts. Find everything we talked about today at parlezvousceo.com. See you next week, and you've got this.